This week's lessons are on prisoners of war in Asia during World War II. So before we get started, this video will provide some background information on this topic. Please take notes as outlined in previous lessons. A prisoner of war is a person, whether combatant or non-combatant, who is held in custody by a belligerent power during or immediately after an armed conflict. Prisoners of war have been used throughout history and for a variety of purposes. They could be isolating them from enemy combatants still in their field, demonstrating military victory, punishing them, prosecuting them for war crimes, exploiting them for labour, recruiting, conscripting them, collecting military and political intelligence, or indoctrinating them into new political or religious beliefs. In 1929, the Geneva Convention was signed by multiple countries. It outlines the treatment of prisoners of war, which was in effect during World War II. It covers what may and may not be done to a prisoner upon capture, what information they are required to give, what may or may not be taken from them, evacuation processes, types of camps that prisoners of war can be kept in, and their conditions and food allocations. Notable signatories include Australia, China, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, the United States, and Japan. The USSR did not sign it. The Japanese during World War II were known to treat their prisoners of war worse than those in Europe. Japan during World War II did not treat prisoners of war in accordance with the Geneva Convention of 1929. This is because they viewed surrender, and therefore becoming a prisoner of war, as dishonourable. Prisoners of war held by the Japanese during the war were subject to execution, beatings, brutal treatment, forced labour, medical experimentation, starvation, poor medical treatment, and there were instances of cannibalism. The most notorious use of forced labour was in the construction of the Burma-Thailand Railway. If prisoners of war were taken at sea, they had orders to be executed. According to the findings of the Tokyo Tribunal, the death rate of Western prisoners was 7 times that of prisoners of war under their allies, the Germans and Italians. Over 22,000 Australian servicemen and almost 40 nurses were captured by the Japanese. Most were captured in 1942 when Japanese forces captured Malaya, Singapore, New Britain, and the Netherlands East Indies. Hundreds of Australian civilians were also interned. By the end of the war, more than 8,000 had died. Prisoners of war were to provide forced labour for the Japanese army scattered across to Southeast Asia. 9,500 Australians worked on the construction of the Burma-Thailand Railway. 2,600 Australians died working on the railway. After the construction of the railway, prisoners of war were taken to Japan for more manual labour. Our first lesson this week will be on the Australian prisoners of war experience in Japanese camps. We'll be looking at primary sources and analysing their meaning, as well as discussing the reasons for these perspectives and what they tell about historical context.